AutomationEdge is building delightful workplace experiences with its robotic process automation, IT process automation, hyper-automation, conversational AI, and intelligent document processing platforms. You can get a snapshot of your process's performance on the AutomationEdge dashboard custom reports. This video displays parameter configuration in custom reports to filter report by tenant ID, user ID, workflow ID, and date. In this video, I will create the template using the template wizard introduced in AutomationEdge release 7.5. I will display parameter configurations for the sales revenue transaction records report. We will first have a look at the sales revenue transactions table in the database, and then we will go to the AutomationEdge portal to create the report with parameter configuration filters. I'm in the PostgreSQL client, that is pgadmin, and you're viewing the sales transactions table. The transactions table includes columns transaction ID, transaction date, sales type, region, product, and quantity, and the workflow ID, tenant ID, and user ID as well. We will use this database table to create the sales revenue transactions report. Now let us go to the AutomationEdge portal. I'm in the AutomationEdge portal reports menu. Let us go to the templates menu. Let me add a new template. Let us call it sales transactions. Let me provide a description, sales transactions. You can provide an associated filter so that users with permission to the workflow only will be able to see the template, and they will be able to see the data of that workflow. However, if you select a workflow here, then you cannot apply workflow filters at the report or dashboard level, as they will be disabled. However, I will leave this blank as I wish to provide the filters at the report level. In the data source, let me select my data source for sales revenue, and let me select fetch table view, and let me select the sales transaction table. Now the wizard approach is available to create the template. Let me click next. Let me add the projections one by one. First of all, let me add the transaction ID. Let me call the display name as transaction ID. I will leave the display data type to string. Click add column. Next, let me add transaction date. Let me call it transaction date and add column. Next, let me add sales type and give it a display name, add column. I will add region, provide a display name and add the column. I will select product, provide a display name and add the column. Let me add sales quantity, provide the display name and add the column. Next, let me add tenant ID. I do not need the tenant ID in the report as such. However, for the purposes of this demo, I'm adding this column in the report so that I can show you the results. As I wish to apply a filter on tenant ID, click add column. And I also wish to apply a filter on user ID. Hence, to show the results, let me add user ID and a display name is user ID. Click add column, and I will also add the workflow ID and add the column. Now let us go next. Now first of all, let me add a group so that I can add multiple conditions. I want to configure the tenant ID parameter to generate a filter. So I will add the condition tenant ID equal to colon. I will call my parameter tenant ID. For now, I will add one condition. Click next. Now I will leave enable summary row unchecked and select drill down column blank. Now in the tenant ID parameter, since I've already added a condition, let me add the parameter tenant ID. Now just like tenant ID, you can also configure the user ID parameter, provide a parameter name, and on the previous screen add the condition. However, we will skip it here. I will come back and add the workflow ID and date column names, as I wish to show the filter effect one by one. Let us click next. I do not wish to group by any columns. I can apply a sort on transaction ID, ascending order, and let us add the sort. Let us click next. I will skip the chart configuration. So my report is ready. You can see the generated SQL, and the filter is applied on tenant ID so that it displays only records for the current user's tenant ID. And you can also view a JSON. Let us click finish. So my template is now available. Now let us go to the dashboards. Let me select my sales revenue dashboard. I will add the report for the template, that is SR sales transactions. Now I will apply the workflow filters later on. For now, we will first check the filter for the tenant ID. So let me click generate and add the report as a table. I will call it sales transactions. Let us expand the report. Now let me first go to PostgreSQL. Now in the database, there are a total of 30 records. And if you see the tenant ID, there are values 3 and 2 in the table. So let us go back to the report. Now if you see on the report, on the first page, we have tenant ID 2. On the second page, we have tenant ID 2. And on the third page, we have tenant ID 2. And a total of 25 records. So it has filtered out 5 records with tenant ID 3. And it has only retained tenant ID 2, which is the tenant ID of the current user. So we have successfully applied the tenant ID parameter configuration. Now let us go back to the template. Let me edit the template. Let me click next. I will skip here. Now you can configure user ID parameter just like the tenant ID parameter by providing a parameter name and also adding it in the condition on the previous screen. For now, we will skip user ID. I will simply add the workflow ID and date column names. For workflow ID column name, let me select the workflow ID. And for date column name, let me select the date column. Now for workflow ID column name and date column name, you don't have to specify any condition. You can directly select your workflows and your date range at the report or dashboard levels. So we'll apply the filters one by one. Let us click next. I will just continue. Next, next. And you can view the generated SQL, which contains the filters for workflow ID and transaction date. And you can also view the template JSON. Let us finish. So this completes our template. Now let us go back to the dashboard. Let me select the sales revenue dashboard. If you remember, on our report, we have 25 records. So now let me click on the dots at the top right corner and go to the report settings. Now from the workflows, let me apply a filter. Now I want to see all the records that have the workflow fetch stock details from Google Finance, which has a workflow ID 95. So let me select this and let me generate the report again and save it as a table with the same name. Now let us check. We have 10 records on the first page and on the second page we have 2 records. And we can only see workflow ID 95 in the workflow ID column. So it has filtered by workflow ID with 12 records. Now you can see dates lie in June, July, August, September. So let us apply a date filter. Now for this dashboard, we have set the date filter at the dashboard level. So we will not be able to filter individual reports. Let us go to the dashboard and edit the dashboard. Now let me select a duration, that is a custom duration with date range from 1st May 2021, July 2021, that is 31st July. Let me update. So now it has applied the filter from 1st May to 31st July, and let us see. So the number of records has reduced to only 5 records on the first page. So the date filter is also applied. Thus we have applied filters for tenant ID, workflow ID and date. Now finally, let us go and configure the user ID parameter to filter by user ID. Let me go to the templates menu. Let us edit the template. There is no change in projections. Let me add a condition. I will select user ID and note that in the operator, you need to select in, as the user ID object supports the in operator. In the value, let me enter a parameter user ID. So now the filter is applied. Let us click next. And in the user ID parameter, let us mention the user ID parameter that we just used on the previous screen. We will leave the rest to default. And you can check the generated SQL. It has incorporated the user ID filter. And in the template JSON, you can see the user ID param names, which is user ID. Let us finish. Now let us go to the dashboards. Let me go to our dashboard, and the report now is filtered by user ID 2. Note here that if you are logged in with a tenant administrator user, you will see the records of all the users of that tenant. While if you have logged in with a tenant user, then you will only see the current user ID of the user. So we have completed configuring tenant ID, user ID, date and workflow ID. Let us recap. We saw parameter configuration in custom reports for tenant ID, workflow ID, date and user ID parameters in the template wizard. You can jumpstart your digital transformation journey with AutomationEdge and view the automation performance in AutomationEdge dashboard reports.